This is The Digital Key, Season 3, Chapter 4. In this episode, we will be talking about language as the means by which we navigate between parallel universes. In the last two episodes, we talked about how flipping between two parallel digital streams sees the flipping of spatial orientation around some common object in two chiral universes. That is, the language we use to describe a subjective internal state is linked to an objective spatial transformation. However, I would like to suggest in this episode that this principle is merely the product of how the use of language shapes our navigation between infinite possibilities. It is clear that the importation of the language of objective, spatial transformations into subjective internal states is reductive. What is also clear is that it provides a precedence to the objective characteristics of local objectives over the subjective states described by streams of digital experience. The manner by which language is imported from the physical world to describe internal states is symptomatic of how the paradigmatic systems of thought have infiltrated the subjective preserve of our intellect. But what is more important is that it is possible to imagine a kind of language which does not import spatial qualities or characteristics into our internal space. In other words, the linking of two digital streams to a common object has less to do with an intrinsic principle than it does with the localization of an outward-inward direction of causality. If we look at infinite recursion and an artifact of sublimation, the product of verbalization is only closed to the extent it doesn't import language from some other systematization. The moment that some objective or spatial language of transformation is imported into the verbalization, it ceases to represent the original subjectivity of the sublimator, because it imports an objective into the subjective space. Navigation between parallel universes is standardized by language common to objective spatiality and internal states. To maintain a closed systematization requires eliminating the importation of associations describing spatiality. All of this is why in the degeneration of an artifact of sublimation, through nonlinear intersections and hierarchical compulsion, we see a flipping of the language within the artifact, which represents an opening of a closed systematization. Nonlinear intersections thus preserve the outward-inward direction of causality by restricting the use of language which departs from importation. To freely navigate parallel universes, digital streams would require a whole new way of using language, a totally new kind of language, which avoids importation of spatial qualities into subjective streams of experience. It would require a completely opaque systematization, which doesn't localize a reductive form of causality, but instead is engineered to guide our passage into complete universes by our own direction. Thus, in flipping between two digital streams, we see a flipping of orientation around some common object. This common object is a causal anchor to the two universes. It is linked to the exclusive word associations represented by the two digital structures describing the two streams. It represents the point of opening of the subjectivity of the subject. The point in their experience where conventional causality reasserts itself. But this anchor is created by the existing systematization represented by the common language of spatiality and internal states. That's the end of the podcast for today.